Hilchos Kilayim Perek Sheni, the laws of forbidden mixtures, chapter 2. Yesterday we introduced the basics of the prohibitions involving mixing seeds together or grafting trees together, the fact that some of the prohibitions only apply in Israel, others apply also in the diaspora, the fact that only the mixing is what's prohibited, but benefiting from the product of the mixture is permitted. And at the end of the chapter, the Rambam introduced the 5 general categories of edible plants. And we're just going to go over them again so that we're familiar with them as we go into this chapter, which really gets into the details, begins getting into the details of the parameters and laws related to forbidden mixtures of plants. So the 5 categories are tvua. Tvua is grain, referring to the 5 species of grain: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Kitniyos are legumes, referring to all kinds of beans and peas and lentils and all that kind of stuff. Pesach is coming, as I mentioned yesterday. Kitniyos is, of course, a big topic on Pesach because the Ashkenazis don't eat kitniyos, the Sephardim do, and it has to do with the climates in which they originally lived when these different materials were stored with wheat flour or not. That's why the Ashkenazi countries, they did store the rice and the beans and the corn together with the wheat flour, so it became similar to chametz, whereas the Sephardi ones, because they lived in hot climates, didn't need that, and so they never stored them together, and they never became forbidden. Anyway, as it relates to Kilayim, it's a category of edible plants. Zeir Oine Ginar, the 3rd category, garden seeds. These are basically, as Rambam defined them yesterday, seeds that cannot be eaten, but when you plant them, they turn into something which is eaten. In other words, onions, garlic, and those types of things. And in that, there were 2 types. Some of them were planted in bulk, mine Yisroyim, and some planted in small quantities, mine Yerakos. So we'll just keep those in mind as we go into the chapter. The Rambam tells us in the beginning of today's chapter what is the amount that constitutes a forbidden mixture. You know, we had this concept also in the 5th book of the Rambam when it came to forbidden foods, meat mixing with milk. How much meat needs to mix into the milk? How much is considered significant? How much is considered insignificant? The same question needs to be asked when it comes to forbidden mixtures of plants. How much is a significant mixture? So the Rambam gives us the basic principle. And he says like this, Halacha Aleph, Zera, shenis'arev by zera acher. If you have seeds from a plant that got mixed with seeds of another plant, im hoyu echad me'esrim v'arba, if the mixed in species constituted 1/24 of the mixture, let's take a case where you have lots of barley, 23 sa'ah of barley. Sa'ah is a dry volume measurement. And into it, actually made this exactly 1/24. This box is 1/24 size of the larger box. 1 sa'ah of wheat mixed into 23 sa'ah of barley. Now this is considered a kilayim, and you cannot go ahead intentionally and plant this mixture until you either take away some of the wheat or you add some of the barley. If you plant it as it is mixed, likely you get lashes for biblically violating the mitzvah of kilayim. Now there's a big principle when it comes to forbidden mixtures, which is ein mevatlin isur lechatchila. You can't, as an initial step, go ahead and nullify a mixture. So how could the Rambam over here say you just take out some wheat or add in some barley? That seems to be purposely nullifying the mixture. So this question is actually very old. The Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, asks this question. And it's just an interesting fact. The source for all these halachas in the Rambam, basically this whole book, is in the order of Zroim in the Mishnah, the first order of the Mishnah, agricultural order. However, the Babylonian Talmud, which is the classic Gemara, doesn't have any Gemara on these tractates because it wasn't relevant in Babylon. Most of the laws weren't relevant in their times. Most of these laws only apply in Israel. In the Jerusalem Talmud, these laws were discussed at length. So many of the halachas in Rambam here are actually found only in the Jerusalem Talmud. So the Jerusalem Talmud asks the question, how could you go ahead and nullify the prohibition here? And the Talmud Yerushalmi answers that, as we're going to see later in chapter 3, a fundamental element of creating the prohibition of kilayim is the fact that when it grows, it's noticeable to the eye. When you have a mixture that's less than the ratio of 1/23, in other words 1/24, so it's not going to be noticeable. And the problem is only going to come when the crops grow. So if you remove the wheat or add some barley before you even plant it, that's not called bittul. That's not called nullifying the prohibition, because the prohibition doesn't happen now. It only happens when the mixture grows and is noticeable. And therefore, before the planting, you're allowed to do whatever you need to do to make sure that later on the mixture will not be noticeable. Halacha beis v'chol shu kilayim mimazera. Any species which is considered to be halachically problematic to be mixed with another species, mitztaref le'echad me'esrim v'arba, can combine to create the 1/24th ratio to forbid the mixture. In other words, the case in the last halacha was just wheat and barley. But what if you have a number of mixtures, number of species that mix into the other species? So if all of them classify as kilayim, because we're going to see later in these chapters, Rambam will give us a detailed list of which species are considered to be a forbidden mixture and which are not. Let's say they all are. So if you have a bunch of little quantities and they all together equal to 1/24th, they also forbid the mixture. Ketzad, what does this look like practically speaking? Esrim mishalish sa'ah shel chitim. You have 23 sa'ah of wheat, shenis'arev ba shnei kabin sa'irim, u'shnei kabin adashim, u'shnei kabin pailim, into which was mixed 2 kav. A kav is a sixth of a sa'ah. So 2 kav of barley, 2 kav of lentils, 2 kav of fava beans, as you have over here, together constituting 1 sa'ah, which is now 1/24th of the entire mixture. Says the Rambam, at this point the mixture becomes forbidden. There's 1/24th of forbidden species in the larger species, and therefore you can't plant it ad sheyimayit sa'ah shel ta'aruves until you lessen either the mixed in sa'ah, the yavar miktsasa by taking out part of it, or yosef alachitim where you add to the wheat. As we're going to learn, both barley and lentils and fava beans are all considered to be a forbidden mixture if they're mixed with wheat. Halacha gimel b'med dvarim amurim. When does the above apply? That we look at the ratio of 1/24th of the quantity of seeds mixed into each other. And that's how we decide whether it's a significant or insignificant mixture. That's only, let's look back at this slide over here, that's only if it's a mixture of these 2 types, the first 2 types of plant. If 2 types of grain mixed into each other, or 2 types of legumes mixed with each other, or it was a mixture of grain with legumes, legumes with grain. But once we cross into the 3rd category of seeds, the garden seeds, if one of them mixed into a larger pile of grain or legumes, we can't just look at the actual quantity and say if there's 1/24th, then it's significant, if there's less, it's insignificant. Because even less, since garden seeds are so small and can produce so much, even based on their small quantity, even less than a sa'ah would mix into a very large quantity. It would be noticeable to the eye when it grew. And so, we don't so much look at the quantity as we look at area. And we're going to go to a slide that we actually used in the last set of laws with a bit of a different number. Last time it was 274. Here we're going to look at a square of 50 by 50 amas, 50 by 50 cubits, 2,500 square cubits. What is significant about this size? In halacha, 50 by 50 cubits is the area where you can plant a sa'ah of grain. It's called base sa'ah, an area of a sa'ah, because that's how much typically you would plant. If you planted here, you would yield a sa'ah of grain. Says the Rambam, since this is a familiar measurement, we're going to use this as a frame of reference. Ask yourself, how much would you plant of this type of garden seed in this area? So it's a case-by-case basis, because different types of garden seeds you planted more or less of in this area. So ask yourself, how much of this garden seed would you plant in this area? And then find 1/24th of that. If that amount got mixed into the grain of the legume, that's a significant mixture. Using the Rambam's words. Shi'uran, the amount to create a significant mixture is echad me'esrim ba'arba, 1/24th of how much you would plant of that species in an area of 50 by 50 cubits. If that amount got mixed into a sa'ah of grain or legumes, not 23 times itself, just 1 sa'ah. If a 24th of what you would plant in an area of a sa'ah got mixed into a sa'ah of grain or legumes, now you can't plant it, it's a significant mixture, till you either lessen the mixed in species or you add onto the grain. Ketzad, what does this look like? So the Rambam will give us a couple of cases where there's different amounts and therefore different results. Mustard seed. Mustard seed got mixed into a pile of wheat. So it's well known that mustard seed is planted. How much fits into a 50 by 50 amma area? They would plant 1 kav. Very small amount. They would spread it in this area. What is a 24th of a kav? If 1/24th of a kav of mustard seed got mixed into a sa'ah of grain or legumes, chayav l'mayit, at this point you have to remove some of the mustard seeds. Let's say it was a type of garden seed where they would plant much more than the mustard seed. 2 se'ah of this garden seed was planted in this 50 by 50 amma area. So, how much is a 24th of 2 se'ah? Half a kav, because there's 6 kav to a se'ah, that means there's 12 kav in 2 se'ah. Half a kav is 1/24th. If a half a kav of this type of garden seed got mixed into a se'ah of grain or legumes, you don't have to remove some of those garden seeds before you can go ahead and plant the mixture. Lefichach, therefore, using this case-by-case ratio, if you have grain into which flaxseed was mixed, this is actual wheat, this is actual flaxseed. If there were 3/4 of a kav in every se'ah of grain, that requires you to lessen it, if not. Why? Flaxseed was very concentrated. They would plant 3 se'ah of flaxseed in every area of 50 by 50 amas. And therefore you need a 24th of that to become mixed with a se'ah of grain or legumes to forbid it. This pattern is used to estimate for all other types of grains and plants. Says the Rambam, a caveat to the entire beginning of this chapter. When are all these laws stated? If you did not intend to mix these things together, nor did you have an intent to plant these two types that came together. But if you purposely intended to mix one species and another, or to purposely plant these two types together, even if there's one wheat kernel in a pile of barley grain, asura lizarda, it's forbidden to plant it. You cannot actively plant kilayim. If it got mixed by mistake, unintentionally, then we use the 1:24 ratio, or the other ratio of the garden seeds. Otherwise, if it's purposeful, forbidden. The same applies to all similar situations. A person planted his field a specific species, never intended to create a mixture. Now it's growing, all of a sudden he sees, noticeable to the eye, there's a mixed species here. So now look at your field. If that one sapling or plant where the Kilayim is growing is 1/24th of the field, that's a significant mixture, you got to pick it up so you lessen the amount. It doesn't look good. People will think you purposely planted Kilayim. Whether this mixed species which is growing is tvua v'kitnis, whether it's a mixture of grain and legumes, or garden seeds with grain, legume, or garden seeds. Any mixture, 1/24th of the field, it's a reason to lessen it. But if it was less than 1/24th, leave it as is, no need to take any away. When do we say this? Only when there's reason to suspect that the person may have done so intentionally. But if the case is clear, everybody can see that the person would never have wanted to have this grow in his field. And it clearly is growing wild. We don't even if it's 24th of the field, we don't obligate him to lessen it, because it's clear he never did it. Keita, what's an example of that? You have a grain field into which indigo is growing. Nobody puts indigo in a wheat field. Or you have fenugreek, which you planted with the express purpose of being used by humans, and there's grasses growing in it. Nobody would do that. You're actually destroying. Indigo in a wheat field destroys the wheat. So nobody would think that you did it purposely. The same applies to all similar situations. We just said fenugreek planted for human consumption. How do you know if fenugreek is planted for human consumption? If it was planted in small patches with little borders of dirt all around. That's how you know. That's the sign. Otherwise it was planted for animal fodder or other things. Same thing if you have a granary area, a place where you're always piling up grain. And growing wild is multiple types of mixed species. We don't force the owner to uproot them. Nobody wants stuff growing in a granary. There's no way he would have planted it purposely. But if he begins to weed out some of them, he say, hey, once you're at it, take everything away. We tell him, uproot everything, leave only one type. Because by picking it, that means you want the rest. Once you want the rest, you're transgressing what we learned yesterday, that you cannot maintain kilayim in your field. And therefore, if you took out one, you got to take them all out. Halacha Yud Aleph. Ein noitin yirakos b'soich sadon shel shikma v'chayetze ba. We cannot plant a vegetable into a stump of a wild fig tree. Some say shikma means sycamore. Popular translation, wild fig tree. Yesterday we learned that you cannot graft a vegetable into a tree. Today the Rambam specifies a vegetable into a wild fig tree. Why? So the commentaries explain because there's some debate whether the Rambam holds that planting a vegetable into a non-fruit bearing tree is permitted or forbidden. By stressing here that we're talking about a wild fig tree, the Rambam is telling us that there's no prohibition against grafting a vegetable into a non-fruit bearing tree. Wild, if it's fruit bearing, it's permitted. But if it's non-fruit bearing, it's forbidden. But if it's non-fruit bearing, then it's permitted. Another halacha. Hataymin agudas lefes utznain v'chayetzeva tachas ha'ilan. This is before refrigeration. So a person buries a bundle of turnips or radishes under a tree in the ground. I have a little picture you can see turnips and radishes in the ground. So he puts it for preservation. Afilu tachas hagefen, even under a vine. Im hayu miktas ha'olin megulin, if part of the leaves were open and you can tell that it's just a buried turnip or a buried radish, einei chayshesh, no need to worry, shahari einei reitza b'hashra shasan, because clearly you don't want them to take root. You don't want to plant them as a mixture, just a storage thing. But if they aren't in a bundle, in which case a person could think maybe they're just being planted naturally, or they're totally covered, the leaves aren't open to the air, now you have to suspect maybe this is kilayim, stay away from it. Halacha Yud Beis, a field that was planted. And you cut the harvest, but you left the roots in the ground. Even though naturally these cannot reproduce till multiple years later, don't go and plant another type of species in this field unless you first uproot whatever is left from the roots. If your field was planted with wheat, before the wheat had a chance to grow, you change your mind, you want to plant barley. Yamtin law, you have to first wait, starve the wheat seeds that are in the ground, until they completely rot in the ground and become wormy, about 3 days. If the field was still saturated with water, wait 3 days. Then using a plow, turn over the entire earth in the field, and now you can plant the new type. You don't have to go crazy and uproot, turn over every single part of the field till there's not one wheat seed that hasn't been turned over. Plow your field as you would plow before the rains. You want your field to get well quenched with the rainwater. That's how you would plow your field. Plow the field the same way now. But if the wheat already grew, and now you change your mind, you want to plant barley, you must also turn over the earth and then plant the barley. If you bring your animal to the field and it chews up all the grown wheat, at this point it's already allowed to plant another species. Sounds like even without going through the plowing and turning over procedure. On the first day of the month of Adar, the court would give an announcement about forbidden mixtures. They would say, everybody go, check your field, make sure nothing is growing improperly. And we're going to come to check soon also. Everybody would go to their garden and their field, clean it out from any potential issues of forbidden mixtures. On the 15th day of Adar, after Purim, the agents of the court would go out and check out the farmers' fields to check if there's actually Kilayim. Originally, if they would find a forbidden mixture, they would simply uproot it and leave it, throw it there in the field in front of the owner. So they say, and the people were actually happy because now they don't have to weed out their field. The agents of the court will do it. All their work is being done for them. Hiskinu, so the court made an enactment that if they find kilayim in your field, they're going to declare any field in which they find the forbidden mixture will be declared ownerless. Of course, by the ratio of 1 to 24. You go, but less than that, they're not going to touch it. If there's a clearly noticeable 1 to 24th ratio of growing mixtures, they're going to declare the entire field ownerless. That's the knas, that's the fine. This is after Purim. Then they wait a month. And during the intermediate days of Pesach, they would go again to the field to see maybe some later grains had grown. And again, they used to just pick them out. Later on, if they found a problem, they would actually declare your field ownerless. The Kilayim shehinetzu, once the mixed species begins to bud, ein mamtinin lahem, the court does not wait for them. Elo yotzan alein miyad, umafkirin es kol hasada, you go out there and right away declare the field ownerless. Im yesh ba'echel me'esrin v'arba, of course, if at that point it's already 1/24 of the field, the court has the right to go out and make it hefker. Otherwise, of course, you take care of your business, check your field, and there will be no problems. And Shalom al Yisrael, you can keep your field without worrying at all.